Okay. Alex wanted me to talk about my here and now 3D experience of having my memories restored. Now, I need to give you a little bit of background so you'll know how I got into this position. My second husband had poisoned me to collect on life insurance. And when I divorced him, I was dying from arsenic poisoning. And I was so sick, I could not even shower by myself. That was in 2001. And I was trying to work because I still had to be self-supporting, and I had a child in high school. And I was a part-time janitor at a limestone quarry. It was 1 or 2 days a week that I would work there and clean the outbuildings. You know, the lab and the scale house and, you know, the buildings where the men worked, to keep them clean enough for the computers to work. Well, I was really sick from the arsenic, and it was taking me longer and longer and longer and longer to do the work. And both California and the American government laws are, if you're working at a mine, the only person who can be there alone is the security guard. So as the janitor, I had to be babysat. So Lou, the man I live with, was the security guard. And his wife had left him 5 years earlier. He was alone. And when I finally filed for divorce, I was still pretty sick. And I had 3 grown adult children staying with me. And they decided to stop pitching in on the rent. Well, I couldn't work enough to cover the bills. So I booted them all out and started selling my properties, you know, my possessions. And I was putting the money into a fund to send my high school age child to live with my mother in Tennessee. And I was going to live in my car. And Lou got wind of this. And he told me that that was a stupid idea, that I would be dead within a month, and that he was not going to stand for it. That the youngest and I could move in with him and he would take care of us. So I moved in with him and he did take care of me. But he and his wife had never filed for divorce. So when I got better, I was working again, and I got tired of being a mistress. That's the flat out truth. About 2011, I started looking for someone that I could marry who was going to be mine. I was looking for a man to marry who would be mine. And it wasn't that I didn't like Lou. It was, I was Christian and I was tired of living in sin. Right. And I wanted to get my act together. And I had lots of friends on Facebook. Most of them were single men. And I had a profile I was looking for, someone intelligent and witty and single. I mean, really single. And this guy showed up, And he said he was retired from the NSA, that he had been a Russian translator, that he had officially been U.S. Air Force. And the being retired, not so much. The being a Russian translator, yes, he was. He's the character that the agent, the American agent in The Hunt for Red October was based on. So he brought in defectors from a Russian submarine and also a Russian pilot when he was stationed in Japan. In American terms, he was a hero of the Cold War because he had done all these things without killing anyone. That's a major big deal.
Yeah.
And so he was very charming and very educated, and he was a writer. I don't think he's ever published any books because he never quite finished anything. He played the drums.
Mm-hmm.
And I had known him about 2 years on Facebook, and he had gradually become friendlier over the time. He had been, I think the terminology is grooming me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I thought he was courting me. There's a slight difference in those terms.
Exactly.
Yes, and he was a year older than I was, so my age and size didn't appear to be a big deal for him. So I was in the process of moving out, and I got hurt at work in 2008. And so this was a difficult, long process for me. Most of my belongings were going to go into storage, and I was going to be moving into a friend's bedroom that she had furnished, which meant none of my things were going to be there except my clothes. And I was depressed about it, had a lot of mixed feelings. And this man's name was Steve. I won't mention his last name. And he decided to send me $1,000 to help me move, and if there was enough money left over to come see him. And he was sharing his sister's house in York, Pennsylvania, which is a bedroom community for the NSA agents.
Okay.
And I ended up, the day before I was supposed to move, Lou told me that his cancer had come back and that he was dying, and that's why he had been such a dick. And I actually do love the guy, so I bought it. And I told him about Steve and told him that I was going to go. And he spent the next 9 days trying to talk me out of it. And in retrospect, I wish he had, but I got on an airplane, flew from California to Baltimore, Maryland, and Steve was there, and he was a lot smaller than he had presented himself on Facebook, which made me feel really, really self-conscious because I'm 5'7" and over 200 pounds and well over 200 pounds. And he was also 5'7" and he was about 180. So it's not that common for the woman to be that much larger than the man. And I really felt self-conscious. But we ended up spending 11 days together, and he actually married me, but not in a legal ceremony. And during the time of our supposed honeymoon, he kept taking me to all of these things concerning Wizard of Oz. And
Okay.
there is a place in Washington, D.C. that is the National Temple for the Mormon Church. And it greatly resembles the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz movie. And every time we would pass by it in our travels, he would tell me about this big sign that they put up that said, "Free Dorothy." And he repeated it over and over and over and over and over and over and over during the 11 days we spent together. And then one day he says, "It's time for you to go home to Lou." And he started to drive me to the airport and basically had what appeared to be a paralysis episode. So we had to pull over for several hours till it cleared, which made me miss the plane. I got a hotel room for the night. And I don't know what his plan was, but he still kept repeating this Free Dorothy stuff. And when I got home, I was ill, physically ill. I was nauseous. Well, this was after the plane flight. My feet were swollen to 3 times the normal size. My shoes had cut my feet where I was bleeding. I was nauseous and dizzy, and it was almost like some sort of drug withdrawal. And I've always been able to see into 4D,
Okay.
okay? But I could filter it out. And from that point on, I have not been able to filter it out. It is there all the time, overlapping 3D.
Amazing.
So whatever is in my astral life, I see it. And it's like an overlay over 3D reality. So I'm like sorting these things out all the time. This is my new normal. And there was a telepathic connection between Steve and I that is still there, even though he's been dead for 3 years. In fact, a couple of nights ago, he came to visit me, check on me, see how I was doing. And that's incredibly disturbing, especially when you know it's a dead person. Him coming to see me after he died was how I knew he had been murdered, because he showed me the mental image of the person who injected something into his IV that he died from. The rest of his family thinks he just died in the hospital. But I got home and I was sick. And a week later, he had an asthma attack at his sister's house, and she refused to call and have an ambulance come get him. And he ended up having a heart attack and basically dying. And they revived him in the hospital and had him under medical paralysis for
Coma?
another week. Yeah, it was
Clinical, like clinical coma?
a clinical coma.
Yeah, okay.
And when they withdrew the drug, he didn't come out on his own. And because of this telepathic connection, I was getting visions of him floating above his body. He wanted to die. And something ripped loose inside of me. And I screamed, no. Not enough that the neighbors would walk away, had to have heard me. And it was like power came out in my hands. And I'm 3,000 miles away from him. You know, I'm in California and he's in York, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
This is a huge distance.
Right.
This is not like around the corner. And up to that, he kept telling me he was going to come here and live with Lou and I. Men are weird, especially in America.
All right.
So anyway, yeah, there are a lot of weirdnesses in the single scene in America. And I'll just leave it at that. Things that I never would have thought of when I was your age. So, but he had been telling me that. Now, when he came out of the coma, he acted like he didn't remember me at all. He even unfriended me on Facebook. And it was years before he sent me a friend request again. Meanwhile, I have all these psionic experiences piling up on me because that's what came first was the paranormal crap.
Uh-huh.
So I stopped sleeping. I was lucid 24/7. I still am if I don't take drugs to sleep. And I would have visions during that time and what the New Age community calls downloads.
Yep.
And I had been a devout Christian before. I kept getting excommunicated because I actually believed in the Sermon on the Mount. And the last time I was excommunicated, it was for living with Lou without being married to him. So that was part of my motive for wanting to leave. So, but all of that, just all of my Christian faith just fell away. It was like, I don't believe that crap. And I still remember it. I still remember believing it. I still remember all the decades of Christian study that I did. I went to seminary. I was a postulant for holy orders. I was a lay reader in the Anglican Church. I was licensed to preach if the pastor took sick. I mean, we're talking the kind of devout that makes people crazy. And it was like a light switch had been flipped off. It was gone. And I was having all this stuff happen that most anybody else would have called it demonic. And I'm sitting there just watching it going, oh, who are you? And some of them would tell me their names, and I looked some of them up, and yeah, they're in somebody's mythology because they come up on Google. Some of them are good guys and some of them are bad guys. I've had Michael show up, the archangel. I've had Lucifer show up, the other version's archangel. So, you know, I don't argue with them anymore. they show up. If they're decent to me and don't ask me to do stuff, I let them hang around. If they ask me to do stuff I don't want to do, I make them leave. So it makes me sound crazy as hell. But there were also these memories that could not possibly have happened in my real world life as I knew it. They could not possibly have happened on Earth, anywhere that I know of. They were in this big lump, and they were all in German. And I studied German in high school and junior college back in 1970. You know, I've kind of kept where I can half-ass speak it like a 3 or 4-year-old. I don't remember declensions. I can't remember noun genders. And God help me if I try to conjugate a verb. But if I'm reading it, I get the general drift. If I'm trying to speak it, I'm like a little kid. I've been told my accent is perfect, like a native speaker. But yeah, so I had all these memories in German of raptors coming through a wall and shredding children. And they were so real, I could not only smell but taste the blood. I knew that did not happen on Earth. And so I started looking for, this was too real to not be real. So when and where and how could this have happened? And I'm educated. I was a senior in university when I had to drop out for having lupus. So I was pre-med microbiology and chemistry. I'm not, you know, I'm not an idiot. I know how to research. So I started looking into reptilians because it was raptors who came through the door, through the wall. And I had always had some memories. I knew that in my past I had levitated. I knew that I could hear thoughts part of the time. I knew that when I got angry, that electronics would blow up. When I was a child, I don't know how the technology was in Russia, but in America, when I was a child in the 1960s, televisions had tubes in them.
Right. Exactly.
And you would take them out and you would test them because the tubes would go bad and you'd have to figure out which one.
Yeah.
Okay, my father would hand these to me while he was going through, and he would write down the numbers and check yes or no. Well, I was dusting them off with my hand, and it took the numbers off. Oh, Dad was absolutely livid. And you did not make Dad mad. He had a temper. And I think the most polite way to put it is I got my ass beat. And he never handed me the tubes again. But he had to go through and figure out which tube each of them was. He had to get a whole new set for the TV. Would have been cheaper to buy a new TV. And I was in big trouble. But about a year later, he had the guy come in to degauss the TV. I don't know if you remember that process or not.
No.
It was It was necessary for cathode ray tubes.
Okay.
And I watched the guy with his magnet playing with it. And the next time the TV got screwy, I did the same motions with my hand. And it fixed it. And so, you know, these were things that were in my background before the memories came. So, since I didn't know what I was remembering, I started doing research. And these people are probably going to be absolutely mortified that I named them. But I read Richard Dolan's books. I read Joseph Farrell's books.
Okay.
I read the books that I can't even think of her name. The lady that was researching the cattle mutilations. I read her books.
Is that Linda Moulton Howe? Yeah, okay.
Linda Moulton Howe. Yes,
Yeah.
I read her books.
Yep.
And out of all of the authors that were out there, I dearly, dearly loved James Mars.
Uh-huh.
He wrote logically, down to earth, in common language.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to think about what was he saying. He was not confusing at all. He was very to the point and laid it down in logical terms. Okay, so with that background, I started listening to the whistleblowers on YouTube.
And that
Now,
was
I did,
that was which year?
when I met Steve was in April of 2013.
Uh-huh.
And by 2014, I was starting to watch the videos.
Okay.
And Randy Kramer's experiences on Mars were the closest to what I remembered. Not exactly right, because I didn't remember being in the battles.
Right.
But
The MDF.
I was not in the same
Mm-hmm.
faction he was.
Yep.
So the memories were different, but the overall picture was the closest to his.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, you know, all right, this is what we're talking about. And then I read Michael Relf's website. Yep. And the two books he has on there. And I thought, okay, that pretty much narrows it down to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started looking for help to make sense of the blob of memories. And I ended up in a Facebook group where Fritz Springmeier declared that I was a demon. Not that I was possessed like he says all the other MELABs are, but that I actually was a demon. I'm like, oh, shit. I was suddenly being attacked all over Facebook by any person that listened to him about me. Well, I was in this chat room with, there were about 20 of us. And we were all in various stages of remembering. And we said, you know, there's no place out there for those of us who are remembering serving in space. There are for the Me Labs, there are for the Montauk people, there are for everybody else. But they treat us like we're different. Like we're not even human anymore. And so that was when we formed our SSP group. And within the first year, we had 2,000 members. And because we had so many admins go batshit, because we are very damaged people and occasionally do go off the deep end, we have this rule that it takes 2 admins to ban somebody. The first big lump of memories was all from one altar. That was the altar who went through, I guess she was the first one that was split off.
Okay.
Because she was the one that remembered, Langley and remembered Montauk and remembered going to Mars and then remembered being on a freighter. And she was out there, she was away from home for 55 years. So that was, they called her Penelope Valkyrin because the unit in the Mars Defense Force that she served with was called the Valkyrin, the Valkyries. We were all women fighter pilots. So
I'm sorry, is this common for the programs to actually first create an altar and then train you and send you away in that altar, not as you, right? Is that a common thing? Okay, so it's not.
they don't want
Yeah,
the Earth version of you
to
to
know
remember any of it.
anything, right? Yeah. So when they
So,
get you back, so that when they get you back, they can switch you over to your Earth self, and you have no idea, right? What
you have
happened?
no idea,
Right,
and you can't expose something you don't remember.
right.
And there are clues
Mm-hmm.
because you'll have a small child doing very adult things
Mm-hmm.
inappropriately. You'll have kids who pick up on a language way too fast because the alters spoke that language.
Yeah.
What did I do to my dad? I was 6, and he had a hunting rifle that he kept behind the door, a 30-06. And I sat down one day and took it apart and cleaned it and put it back together. And he said, "How did you know how to do that?" I go, "I don't know." So he was a bit leery of me for a while.
What else did
But
you have?
yeah,
What else did you have? Anything else that you remember from that? I mean, as you look back, there must have been many things like that. Did you ever feel any connection with the subject? I mean, like Mars, the space, aliens, whatever.
when I was 10 years old,
Mm-hmm.
we had a school assignment to keep a scrapbook.
Right.
And mine was on UFOs.
So you could pick which subject you want to do it, right? On, and you did on
Mm-hmm,
the one on UFOs. Okay.
mm-hmm.
Right.
My mother was mortified. You got to understand, my father was a preacher for the Church of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
the version that doesn't have instrumental music. They are a cult, a religious cult. And my mother did whatever my dad said. And they had me.
Mm-hmm.
And my father died in 1980, and my mother is to this day mortified by everything I do. So,
Sure.
yeah, she has at least 3 altars,
Right.
and one of them has programming to be my handler. And so I just basically avoid her. It's easier on both of us.
So, do you know now, or do you have any idea right now about what was going on around your family as you grew up? Because you must have had something happen that would give you a clue that someone was taken or someone was, manipulated or something.
They thought I slept. They thought I walked in my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I had trouble sleeping at night. I still do. My subconscious thinks it's not safe. Um, my brothers both had similar behaviors. Oh, gee. Um, you know, a lot of the stuff that we did, the behaviors we expressed, were on a par with what severely abused children act like. And Dad did abuse us. We were not raped at home, but we were severely beaten on an ongoing and regular basis. He believed in spare the rod and spoil the child. And he had no patience with us. And once he started swinging, he couldn't stop until Mom stopped him. And she didn't unless she thought he was going to kill us. So there would be, there would be lots of missing time from school because we had been beaten so badly we couldn't walk. He
Mm.
smoked inside the house, so we all had asthma really bad and caught everything. So you have these sickly, abused children already just based on the here and now. And you add in the stuff from being MK and MELAB. And it makes this big lump that I don't know why the schools didn't report us to Child Protective Services. Or that may have been why we moved so much. I ended up going to 36 different schools before I graduated high
Yeah.
school. And the normal is 3.
Wow.
Elementary school, junior high, high school. That's the normal. And I went to 36. So I sat down one day and counted them up. It was 36 different schools. And that's not normal. And people should have noticed and didn't. And I think part of the problem was Dad was avoiding Child Protective Services, but Dad also hated the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect because we would move and then 2 weeks later move again.
Oh, okay.
As a child, I'm looking back on this and thinking he was trying to get away from someone. So he had to know there was someone abducting us and not an ET, someone human, because I remember being taken by humans. I don't remember being abducted by aliens. I do remember there were times they would wear costumes to look like reptilians. But when you stop being scared, you can see the zippers. And I would start unzipping them. So they stopped with the costumes.
Jesus.
So yeah, it's like, you know, um, The last time that I had an actual ET abduction was in 1995. There were bright lights outside, and then I woke up on the spaceship. I was inside basically a plexiglass tube, and the clear plastic hard ones, and I was strapped to a board of some kind inside of it, and then stood up. And I was naked. That's always embarrassing. And they were angry, and they were asking me telepathically what had happened to my uterus. Well, I had had cancer surgery in 1988. And so I told them I had cancer, and they were very angry. Apparently they wanted me to have a baby for them. And I had been part of the breeding program when I was first married, because I lost 4 babies right in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were apparently wanting to continue that. And because I no longer had a uterus, they couldn't. And they left a mark on my arm.
Mm-hmm. I can't see it.
I've scratched it badly.
Okay.
It used to be 2 squares on point,
Mm-hmm.
and I've scratched it because it itched. Eventually, Lou took a car mechanic magnet to it, and it stopped itching after that. But
Who were they?
so there was a Naga in the back. Could have been the twin sister of the one that was at Langley.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who haven't heard that or haven't heard it yet, a Naga is they're not hybrids, but they look like what would happen if you crossed a human with a snake.
So bipedal,
And
arms, legs, but like sort of like a...
no, the head is very reptilian,
Uh-huh.
but the torso is human, and they have arms and hands like a human, and everything else is snake-like. And they have scales.
Right.
So they are completely reptilian,
Right.
with some shapes.
Yeah.
And she was black on her back and cream on her belly, and had bright blue eyes, but very reptilian. And she was in charge, and there was a row of, I don't know what race they were. The ivory statues of the Chinese sages?
Which ones?
The ones with the really
yeah.
big...
The big heads. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That's what they looked like, except they were a beige color. Not really a human color like skin, but beige. And they had brown eyes. And they were all telepathic.
Sure.
Nobody talked. Nobody talked with their mouths. So there was the one Naga and 4 of these sage-looking guys. I have no idea where they were from. I understand that the Naga themselves are from Cassiopeia.
So the other guys, they looked exactly like those. like
Yeah.
elderly looking guys. Wow,
Hmm. They
amazing.
looked exactly like that.
with
Yeah.
with like
They're-
beard running and stuff, mustache.
well, it was like tiny,
Mm-hmm.
like they, but yeah,
Amazing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well.
I never said this was normal,
Okay, so let's.
but yeah, that was what, almost 15 years. Well, that was in 1995, and my memories were brought back in 2013. So, yeah, I've had stuff all along that told me there was something different about me, but
Nothing too
you
telling.
can, yeah, nothing that says, you served in space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, just to clarify, the two words "Free Dorothy" was actually the code word to activate you.
yeah,
Okay. And
free Dorothy code word.
Dorothy is the name of the girl in The Wizard of Oz, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just for the viewers who will watch this. So
Um,
he was taking you there, and the Wizard of Oz is of course the prime original MK Ultra programming system, right?
well,
That they used.
they have Wizard of Oz, and they have
Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, sure.
Yes, they have Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland,
Uh-huh.
and I understand that they have a couple more now. But Wizard of Oz was what was used on me for that altar.
Yes.
Now they use different programs for different altars
Uh-huh.
because
Do
altars are
do
set up in a hierarchy.
do you remember like watching Wizard of Oz when you were a child and having some kind of weird sense of something or nothing of that sort?
Yes,
You
it
did?
was. It was. It felt like it was real instead of like it was a fantasy.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I've had that with other movies since. Things that should have been purely fiction felt real.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have turned out to be from programming,
Mm-hmm.
and others have turned out to be from my family history.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Past lives and stuff.
Robin Hood
Robin Hood. Yeah.
is Robin Hood. The real Robin Hood was Aubrey de Vere,
Mm-hmm.
and he's in my family tree. The There was a real King Arthur,
Mm-hmm.
and his father was the real first Pendragon of Wales, and they are in my family tree. And so some of the stories that felt real, even though they were supposed to be fiction, it's turned out that the real people are in my family tree. So that's like a genetic memory, which science is showing genetic memory is real.
Sure. So the main question then is why did was Steve sent to do this? Was he conscious of it? He obviously knew what he was doing, right? So
He obviously knew
right,
what he was doing, and he never told me what his purpose for it
sure,
was.
sure. But do you think they kind of was that like a counteraction or counter programming on their part to activate your memory so you could be set out there too? Were they like at odds with the CIA or how? What was your take
Oh,
on
yeah.
that?
My take on it is that the NSA and the CIA are in a agent agency war
Yeah, okay.
for funding
For funding.
and for funding.
Okay.
And they've been in an agency war for funding since 9/11 happened, and both agencies were blamed for dropping the ball.
So that's what you can gather from why they would do it to you.
That's the only that I cannot see any other rational motive.
Okay.
There's no other rational motive to have activated me. It makes no sense at all why a spy agency would expose a secret asset of another spy agency unless it was part of their interagency war.
Okay.
And that's the biggest question I have about this whole thing is why the hell did they decide to activate me? Because I'm the only one that I know of that was deliberately activated. Everybody else, it's been they had an MRI,
Right.
or they got a bump on the head, or they just started talking because they'd remembered it all along. I'm the only one that I know of that was deliberately activated. And it's like, why? Why? Why fuck with my life? If they had left me alone, I would never have gone to this. I wasn't even planning to be public with it until I started being shot at with energy weapons. They started with 3 directed energy weapons and followed up with lasers after that. And then they put, this one board that's between the 2 doors, that has metal on the back side of it because there's a device in that wall aimed at this chair. Yeah. We thought the smartest thing to do was block the device because if we take it out, they'll just put in a new one.